granniopteryx, granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello. Well, we do have something of a shitstorm here, haven't we? Boy George releases a track defending Israel. You say genocide, I say war. Boy George releases pro-Israel song, We Will Dance Again. And all those propaganda outlets that Keir Starmer, may his bribes decrease, that Keir Starmer has referred to as trusted media. Well, they've been so shocked, I tell you, so shocked by this defence of the fix Israel is in, that they've turned on their erstwhile gay icon with the sort of fury reserved for class traitors and bloated capitalists. And I suppose the most obvious example would be this article, and it's that way, isn't it? This article in The Guardian. Boy George has released a new song entitled We Will Dance Again, which voices support for Israel's military action in Palestine, posted on X and Instagram with the Hebrew title Od Nir Kod. Alongside its English translation, the song features a pop reggae backing. The opening lyrics are, you say genocide, I say war. When you're attacked, that's what the army's for. Does it get ugly? You bet it does. When I know you want to kill every last one of us. Boy George cites the attack by Hamas at the Nova Music Festival in October 2023, saying the civilians killed there were murdered for the crime of dancing. The article then goes on to point out that a total of 344 civilians and 34 security personnel were killed and 44 people were taken hostage. And then the kicker, the overall Palestine death toll since the war started is more than 73,000. 344 civilians, 34 security personnel were killed and 44 people taken hostage. And then the overall Palestinian death toll since the war started is more than 73,000. This doesn't mention the other Israeli civilians, the elderly, the babies, men, women, children, whole families and their dogs tortured to death in their own homes while their captors raided their refrigerators for soft drinks and chicken legs. Neither does it mention the death toll of the Israeli foot soldiers who were sent into Gaza to rescue the hostages, braving the snipers and the tunnel attacks. Nor did it even seem to consider that if Israel did have genocidal intent, they would simply have kept the army out and sent the Air Force to vaporise the place, which they could have done fairly easily. But it's this that really struck me most forcibly. Here. Boy George, who is not Jewish, has recently voiced support for Jewish communities. To my mind, that's probably the most telling comment in the whole article. The fact is that The Guardian felt it necessary to remind us that there's something odd about Boy George. He's not Jewish, and he's standing up for the Jews. That one little observation indicates that in their mind, only people who are Jewish should be ready, willing and able to do that. And if you're not Jewish and you stand up for Jews, then there's something, I don't know, a bit odd about you, according to The Guardian, of course. How many times have you heard people being interviewed and saying, well, I'm not Jewish, but I stand with the Israeli position, or something like that. There are plenty of them. There's a whole organisation called Our Fight, which is, I forget his name now, it's run by somebody who is frequently spoken of as, or who actually has to say, I'm not Jewish, but, or he's not Jewish, but. We take that for granted. But how many times have you actually heard people say, well, I support the Indian position on Kashmir, although I'm not a Hindu? Or how about, I think that Trump is wrong to demand American ownership of Greenland, although I'm not myself Danish. Do you see? It's exactly the same thing. And yet that's really a weird thing to say. But here, The Guardian takes it for granted that the people who would naturally take the side of Israel would be only Jews, and that it's unusual for any non-Jew to see any justice in a Jewish cause. The Guardian then goes on to say that Boy George's characterisation of Israel's action as a legitimate military response runs counter to a United Nations inquiry, which stated in 2025 that Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. There's no acknowledgement at all of the habit of the UN of condemning Israel for just about anything and believing anything that any interested party might cook up. Personally, I'd say that any reasonable person might be made a tad suspicious of the UN when, if they discovered that in 2025 the UN passed 15 resolutions criticising Israel and 11 for every other country in the world. And that would include North Korea, Sudan, Syria, Yemen, China, Myanmar, and Russia. I'd say that any reasonable person might conclude that there's something seriously skewed about the focus of the UN. So when The Guardian says that the UN said X or whatever, I wouldn't just take that for granted. And certainly The Guardian doesn't see things in that way. I suppose many of you will recognise the term confirmation bias. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, or some of you for whom English isn't a native language, you might know it as, in your own language. So I'll define it. It means that when you have a preconceived view of a particular situation, you might then register every incident involving that situation while forgetting all the other incidents which have nothing to do with it. Some people might be aware of that phenomenon from the notorious work schedule that was produced in court and was a major piece of evidence to convict the nurse Lucy Letby of killing or harming a lot of babies in the Countess of Chester Hospital, because the chart showed her at work, and that at work when various babies were in difficulties. But what it didn't show was all the times babies were in difficulties when she wasn't on the ward. And that's being called into question now. But that's an example of confirmation bias. They were just looking at the time she was on the ward where the babies got into difficulties, and then they just projected all these problems onto her. Less controversially, I suppose, there's always the red car theory, which you might have heard of. Many of us have heard that red cars are more accident prone, that they get more speeding tickets, or they're riskier to insure. So many of us, primed with this information, will start noticing every red car involved in a crash, in a near miss, or some sort of ticketing offence. Every time we see a red car at the side of the road, it doesn't matter what for, will sort of, the thought will flash into our heads. What do you expect? It must have been in an accident. And we'll remember it more clearly than all the blue and black vehicles that we might also have passed at the side of the road. If two cars are involved in an accident and one of them is red, again, primed with that information, we're more likely to expect that it's the red one that was being driven carelessly. And then after a while, we end up with the belief that red cars are uniquely dangerous, even if the overall data doesn't actually support that. And following on from that, we'll be seeing articles in The Guardian talking about how dangerous red cars are, or more to the point, how dangerous are the sort of people who choose red for the colour of their car. And then you'll find somebody quoting backing evidence that, if you put it under some scrutiny, turns out to be another opinion of someone else in another newspaper article that came out in 1998. But then going on to infer that anyone who leaps to the defence of red cars, or the owners of red cars, especially the ones who do not themselves own a red car, well, they must have become victim of some sort of psychopathy. And that's confirmation bias for you. And when you get lots of articles in The Guardian assuming that there's this terrible thing going on because somebody said something in another newspaper article, that's exactly what's happening here. And that's exactly why Boy George is getting all... That's why Boy George is getting all this stick for his more clear-sighted view of what's going on. He is not using confirmation bias. He is concentrating on what's going on, and all power to his elbow. I'm quite impressed by him, actually. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.